The Wyoming wind screamed across the barren plains like a wounded beast, tearing at every crack and crevice of Samuel McKenna's rugged ranch. The land stretched on forever. An endless expanse of cracked earth, dry grass, and swirling dust devils that spun like restless spirits refusing to rest. At 43, Samuel stood on his weathered porch, his frame stiff with the weight of years hardened by hardship. His sun-baked skin told stories of relentless days under a merciless sun. His jaw clenched tight, his heart heavy enough to sink into the dust below. 3 harsh winters had stolen Martha from him, leaving only memories and a silence so thick it pressed against his chest like a cold hand. The ranch hands drifted in and out. But come sundown, all that remained was the mournful howl of coyotes echoing across the empty plains. Nights were the worst, dark and hollow, with the shadows whispering secrets he dared not listen to. He'd sit at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on Martha's apron still hanging on its hook, the air so still it felt as if the house itself was holding its breath. That loneliness gnawed at him, relentless. Until finally, he penned a letter. He wasn't a man given to fanciful dreams, but practicality had edged out pride. A matrimonial agency in Chicago promised discretion, promised a wife who could endure the wilds and the loneliness. Samuel's hand had moved with quiet resolve as he listed his needs. Slim, obedient, hard-working, between 25 and 35. A woman who wouldn't complain when the water ran dry or when winter storms kept them trapped for weeks. He pictured her in his mind, quiet, slight like Martha, with neat hands and a soft voice. Someone who'd fit into the empty spaces her absence left behind. He told himself it wasn't about love. Love was a luxury in this place. This was about survival. 2 months, the agency claimed. That was all. 2 months until she'd arrive, and with her a flicker of hope. That thought kept him busy, patching the crooked door hinge, fixing the squeaky bed frame, battling mice in the pantry. Every hammer strike echoed like a countdown to change. He even tried to imagine laughter ringing through the house once more, but in truth, it was Martha's laughter that haunted him. Her voice, her smile, now just echoes in the empty rooms. When the day finally arrived, Samuel dressed in his best shirt, starched stiff enough to chafe his neck. He arrived at Cedar Ridge Station early, pacing so much the station master asked if he was ill. His palms sweat as passengers disembarked, a traveling salesman, a few ranch hands, even a minister clutching his Bible tight. His stomach sank as the crowd thinned, hope flickering. Had she changed her mind? Had the agency tricked him? Then she appeared. The last passenger, stepping carefully down the narrow stairs, clutching a battered valise. Samuel's breath hitched, not in relief, but in dread. She was nothing like the fragile, delicate woman he'd envisioned. No, she was full-figured, strong in her stance, her traveling dress strained at the seams. Her face was ruggedly handsome, not dainty, with storm-gray eyes that held steady under dark curls spilling from her bonnet. The moment she appeared, it was like witnessing a storm's aftermath. Someone who'd battled fierce winds and survived, emerging stronger than before. Her eyes held stories of hardships, yet her stance radiated resilience. "Mr. McKenna," she said, her voice a strange blend, soft Irish lilt tinged with the sharp edge of Boston steel. It cut through the quiet like a blade. "Miss O'Brien," he managed, tipping his hat as he stepped forward. He reached for her, feeling the weight of her presence, heavier than her slender frame suggested, and guided her toward the waiting wagon. She climbed aboard without a second thought, her skirt settling with practiced grace, as if she'd done this 100 times. The buckboard groaned beneath their combined weight, creaking like an old timber under strain. Samuel's mind raced, wondering if those fragile axles could hold the 10-mile ride back to the ranch. The silence stretched between them, thick as a summer fog. Finally, Margaret O'Brien broke it. "The agency said you were a widower," she said, voice calm but edged with curiosity. "How long?" 3 years this winter." He nodded, jaw clenched tight. "Lost her a while ago," he muttered. "Sorry for your loss," she said softly. But her eyes held no pity, only understanding. He wanted to ask her more, to pry into her past, but words clung to his throat, refusing to come out right. She seemed to read his mind. "The agency told me you had expectations," she said, her tone even, almost gentle. He flushed, recalling his letters. Clear, simple. Slim, obedient, diligent. Those were his words. He was 28, and he'd thought he knew what he needed. But she continued, meeting his gaze with a fierce pride. "I came west because I wanted a life different from what Boston held. That's the truth, Mr. McKenna. I'm not slim, and I won't apologize for it." Her words hit harder than a gust of wind through the open plains. Samuel kept his eyes fixed on the rutted trail ahead, clutching the reins as if they could steady the storm swirling inside him. He could already see Tom Bradley's grin, picking at him, mocking him. Sam McKenna, the picky rancher, finally getting hitched. And she's everything he didn't order. Curves that defy expectations, a voice like steel, and hands rough enough to wrestle a calf. When they finally reached the ranch, Rex, his old dog, bolted out barking fiercely at the stranger. Margaret knelt, offering her hand, and the dog's tail wagged as if he'd found a new friend, something he'd been waiting for. A strange tug twisted in Samuel's chest at the sound of her gentle voice greeting Rex, reminding him of Martha's soft tone, familiar, warm, kind. Inside the house, Margaret surveyed the sparse furnishings, the cluttered mess of a bachelor's life without a word. She brushed her hand over the apron hanging by the stove, but left it untouched. When she moved into the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves and asking where the pans were, Samuel felt a prick of unease. This stranger was already filling his space, her scent, her movements, her presence. "I'll check the herd," he mumbled, backing toward the door. She only nodded. The first signs of life in that forsaken place in months, like a ghost stirring from its grave, hit Samuel like a thunderclap. But he didn't dare look back. Something dark and unseen was already shifting inside that cold, silent house. And he wasn't sure he was ready for what was coming. The first week felt like living through a relentless storm that refused to break, an unyielding tempest that battered his soul. Every dawn, Samuel woke in the barn, hearing Margaret's heavy footsteps echo through the empty halls of the house, as if she were stomping away the shadows. By the time he made his way inside, a fresh pot of coffee was already brewed, and breakfast was laid out on the table. Nothing like the meager beans and stale bread he'd lived on before. This was real food: eggs, bacon, warm biscuits, meals that spoke of effort, of life returning. They ate in a tense silence, the scrape of forks on plates louder than any words spoken aloud. Margaret worked harder than Samuel had expected, scrubbing away years of dust, hauling buckets of water from the well with relentless strength, kneading dough with a steady, hammering rhythm. She mended, cooked, and cleaned, with a resolve that made his admiration war with resentment. He caught himself watching her more often than he liked. Her arms as they chopped wood, her skirts sweeping the dirt as she carried water. An image of purpose and capability. She was everything useful, everything strong, but not what he'd asked for. One evening, when he thought she couldn't hear, he muttered bitterly, "I asked for a wife, not a workhorse." Her hands froze over the mending in her lap. She looked up, her gray eyes sharp as flint, her voice like a blade. "Would you prefer a delicate flower who faints at the sight of blood? Because that won't keep your cattle alive or your house standing." His words stung, but they cut deep because they rang true. He turned away, cheeks burning with shame, but her voice followed him out the door, cold and clear. "Maybe you should decide what you really want, Samuel McKenna." Rumors began to swirl in town, whispered behind closed doors and over the counter at the general store. Mrs. Henderson eyed Margaret up and down with a knowing smirk. "So, you're Samuel's bride. Sturdy woman, aren't you? You'll need to be. Out there on that ranch, it takes more than charm." Margaret's smile was sweet, but edged with steel. "Indeed, I've always believed a woman should be built for the life she's meant to lead. Don't you agree, Mrs. Henderson?" The shopkeeper's mouth snapped shut, caught off guard. Samuel almost cracked a smile, but swallowed it, reluctant relief flooding him, even as a bitter taste remained. At the feed store, Jack Morris clapped him on the shoulder, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Heard you got yourself a bride, Sam. Bet she keeps you well fed, eh?" His gaze lingered a little too long on Margaret's curves, and Samuel's fists clenched tight. Before he could say a word, Margaret spoke for herself, voice steady and unwavering. "The best meals a man ever had," she said, chin high. "Deserve a hard-working husband who's worth feeding." The men chuckled awkwardly, but the sting of their teasing was deflected, just enough to leave Samuel with a tangled mess of pride and shame swirling inside. By Saturday night, the tension in that little homestead hit a breaking point. The wind howled like a banshee tearing across the open plains, and in a heartbeat, the sky above Wyoming turned a sickly, unnatural yellow. No warning, no gentle shift, just a sudden, ominous darkness that draped the land in foreboding. Samuel had been out riding the fence lines, his boots kicking up dirt and his eyes scanning the horizon, when the air thickened with a heavy, choking dust that swallowed the sun and blurred the world into shades of gray. His horse snorted nervously, sensing the storm's fury as Samuel pushed the beast harder, racing back toward the ranch with every ounce of strength he had. And then, through the swirling dirt and chaos, he saw her, Margaret, outside the barn, fighting frantically with the restless cows as the wind tore at her dress and whipped her hair into a wild tangle. Her hands were trembling, her face set with stubborn resolve. But the storm's wrath was closing in, fast. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest. This was no ordinary squall. This was nature's wrath unleashed, and he could only wonder if they had enough time to outrun it. What secrets did the storm hide, and what dangers lurked just beyond the swirling curtain of dust? Stay tuned, because this wild wind was only the beginning, and the real fight for survival was about to begin. The night sky seemed to swallow the world whole, the wind howling like a banshee, tearing through the plains with savage fury. And just then, a voice cut through the roar. "Get inside!" he shouted, but the wind snatched his words away, leaving only the eerie silence that followed. She didn't hesitate. Instead, her eyes locked on the chicken coop, where the door had been ripped clean off, hens scattering like flickering shadows in the storm's chaos. Without a second thought, she darted into the maelstrom, her figure swallowed by the swirling dark. In the chaos that followed, they fought like wild animals, shoving frantic hens back into the coop, wrestling the barn doors shut against the wind's relentless assault, stuffing sacks to block out the flood of gritty sand pouring through every crack. When they finally staggered into the dim glow of the house, coughing and bruised, Samuel's gaze caught a trickle of blood slipping from a jagged cut on her forehead. His hand moved before he could stop it. "You're hurt," he murmured, concern thick in his voice. "It's nothing," she replied. But her eyes softened when he pressed a damp cloth to her skin, revealing a flicker of vulnerability beneath her tough exterior. Hours drifted by as they sat close, the storm battering the walls like a vengeful beast, coffee growing cold in their cups. Samuel found himself asking questions he'd long avoided. "Why did you come west, Margaret?" Her fingers clenched tightly around her mug, her voice barely above a whisper. "My parents died. My brother inherited everything, and his wife made it clear I was a burden, too old, too substantial for the kind of life they wanted. So I answered the ad, chasing a new beginning." Samuel looked at her in the flickering firelight, noting her face carved from granite, her shoulders broad and unyielding. Her presence filled the room, a force that challenged the lonely wilderness outside. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder, did she end up with a fool who asked for the opposite of what she truly was? "At least you're honest about it," she said softly, breaking the silence. That honesty, raw and unguarded, grew quietly between them in the days that followed. When Samuel injured his knee while fixing fence posts, Margaret became his steadfast anchor, hauling water, tending the cattle, even riding out to check the herd across the rugged range. He protested, stubborn as a mule, but she silenced him with a look that spoke volumes. "Would you rather lose your cattle, Samuel, or swallow your pride?" she seemed to ask, her eyes daring him to choose. He had no answer. Word spread among the neighbors, growing like wildfire. Children flocked to her, drawn by her strength. Women sought her advice in hushed tones, and even the men who once snickered at her size grew quiet when they saw her wield an axe or tame a wild horse with gentle hands. Samuel tried to ignore the stirring in his chest. But one moonless night, everything changed in a heartbeat. The distant sound of horses woke him from restless sleep. Rustlers, 4 men circling the barn like predators. His hand reached for his rifle, but Margaret was already loading her shotgun, her face set with fierce resolve. "They're after the stallions," she whispered. "You could have died," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a winter storm. "So could you," he rasped back, eyes dark with unspoken fears. Her gaze shimmered with unshed tears, a storm of emotion threatening to break loose. "I'm not what you wanted, Samuel. But I'm here. I'll stand with you, fight for this ranch, for what's ours," she declared, her hand trembling but fierce as it was rough and calloused from hard work. He seized her hand, roughened by years of toil, and held it tight, an unspoken confession. "I see that now. I was a fool to want less," he admitted, voice thick with regret. From that night on, something shifted beneath the star-studded sky. When winter's icy breath arrived early and snow piled high, trapping them in a world of white silence, their bond only deepened. They toiled side by side, sharing laughs over clumsy mistakes, stories spun by flickering firelight that cast shadows on their faces. One evening, as the wind howled like a banshee outside and the cold seeped through the cracks, Samuel cupped her face in his rough palms and kissed her, not out of obligation, but driven by raw, honest truth. She responded without hesitation. And in that moment, The walls they'd built around their hearts finally crumbled, brick by brick. Months slipped by like a gentle creek, and one spring night, after wine and laughter had loosened their tongues, the old bed gave a deafening crack. Wooden planks splintered, the mattress tumbled, and they fell together in helpless, roaring laughter. The rancher had wanted a slender, obedient bride. Samuel got a curvy, wild spirit who broke his bed in the very first night. Margaret buried her face in his shoulder, tears of joy mixing with her laughter, echoing across the empty room. "We'll never live it down," she chuckled. "Let them talk," Samuel said, pulling her close, a fierce pride in his voice. "Let everyone know I've got the best damn wife a man could ever ask for." Years rolled on, and the ranch thrived beneath their hands.